Hi, welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification for a new episode. Tonight, we'll be featuring the case of Tommy Lynn Sells. He's a name that many people don't know, and you really should. So let's find out more. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Tommy Lynn Sells. He was born in Oakland, California on June 28, 1964. Tommy had a twin sister whose name was Tammy Jean. When they were both young, they contracted meningitis. They were approximately 18 months old. While Tommy only suffered a high fever, his sister, however, had passed away due to the inflammation. Shortly after, Tommy was sent to live with his Aunt Bonnie in Missouri. He lived there until he was about 5 years old. Tommy started acting up from a very early age. He started drinking at the age of 7 years old. 7. When he was 8 years old, he began spending time with a man named Willis Clark, who was from a neighboring city, who later identified as a child molester. Tommy quit school after the 8th grade. So that was the only education he had, was until that point. Tommy claims that at 13 years old, he tried to rape his mother and that his family moved out of their mobile home without telling him. At age 14, Tommy started traveling in order to find work. He traveled by hopping trains, stealing vehicles, and he made money by working, panhandling, or more commonly, just flat out stealing. Tommy held several different jobs, often doing menial labor. His limited education made him underqualified for many higher paying jobs that he wanted to get, but couldn't. Tommy was a used car salesman and ended up finding love and getting married. So where does the story turn? Well, in 1992, Tommy attacked a young woman named Fabian Witherspoon. Tommy threatened to kill her with a steak knife and repeatedly raped her. He took her into her shower to assault her, and she surprised him by grabbing a ceramic duck that was about the size of a football, and she clubbed him over the head repeatedly. She was able to get the knife away and began stabbing Tommy in self-defense over and over again. She made a break for it. She frantically ran to the front door, but Tommy caught up to her, and he dragged her into a spare bedroom off the hallway. He threw her onto the bed, and when he did, she landed face first, and her hand fell directly onto that knife. He tied her hands, he tied her feet, and he held the knife to her throat. He then attempted to smother her with a quilt and hit her over the head with a piano stool, and then left. She survived. The next thing Fabian remembered was waking up on the front steps of where she lived. She was naked, bloody, and screaming. The police and the paramedics came, and they took her to the hospital. She had to have plastic surgery on her hand, and she had to have many stitches in her head. Coincidentally, Tommy ended up at the same hospital because he'd endured 18 stab wounds. She fought back. Tommy spent 7 days in the hospital, but it was determined from Fabian that that was her attacker. So he was taken to county jail. In September 1992, a grand jury indicted him on 5 counts of rape and felony assault. On June 25, 1993, 3 days into his trial, Tommy pleaded guilty, but it was to a lesser charge of malicious wounding. Why? Fabian said of this court trial, quote, "It was his word against mine. He said I attacked him. He tried to turn it around and make it sound like I just started beating on him. They didn't give me a choice. She said the prosecutors deal with Tommy. They just told me we were going to have to do this, end quote. The prosecutor said at the time, quote, while we believe her in her story, serious questions arose sufficient to warrant a plea, end quote. In May 1997, Tommy was released. On New Year's 1999, after closing time at a local bar, Tommy made his way to the Harris home and entered through an open window. Well, Tommy and his wife knew the Harris family. They knew them through church. Tommy visited the home several times for Mr. Harris to provide marital difficulties counseling. When Tommy showed up there, he went into a bedroom and saw Kayleen Harris, known as Katie, who was 13 years old. She was sleeping. She also had her 10-year-old friend, Crystal Searles, over, and she was sleeping in the top bunk of their bunk bed. Tommy put his hand over Katie's mouth and brandished a 12-inch knife. He sliced off Katie's shorts and underwear, and he began fondling her. She wiggled free, stood up, and screamed. Tommy then sliced her throat 2 times. Tommy went on to then stab her 16 more times. Her friend Crystal, who, like I said, was sleeping in that room during the attack, said, quote, I'll be quiet. I promise I won't say anything, end quote. Tommy then slit her throat too. She fell to the ground and pretended to be dead. Tommy then just left the home. As he exited, he wiped his fingerprints off on a doorknob, but then decided to take 2 window screens that he thought might contain his fingerprints. He wasn't the brightest. Tommy then drove to his house, but he first stopped to discard the knife in the window screens in a vacant field. While Crystal, who had survived the attack, the friend, ran outside to a neighbor's house and called police. Her friend inside, not so lucky. Crystal identified Tommy from a photograph and was able to testify at his trial. Tommy confessed to killing Katie and confessed to attacking Crystal. He went with police to the residence and gave a videotaped reenactment of the crime, and this aligned with Crystal's account of the events. The confession that Tommy gave police was only the beginning of what was about to come. Over the next few months, Tommy confessed to a ton of murders spanning over 30 years and spanning across the United States. Some of these murder confessions are the following. In 1983, a couple and their 4-year-old son. In 1985, a 35-year-old woman and her 4-year-old son. In 1987, a 20-year-old woman and a family of 4, consisting of a husband, wife, their 3-year-old son, and 2-month-old daughter. In 1991, a woman and her daughter. In 1992, a 20-year-old woman. In 1997, a 10-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl. In 1998, a fellow male coworker, a 9-year-old girl, and a 32-year-old woman and her 8-year-old daughter. In 1999, a 9-year-old girl, a 13-year-old girl, and a 14-year-old girl. Tommy gave himself his own nickname. He called himself the Coast to Coast Killer. He did this to describe his trail of killings. Well, do you remember Fabian Witherspoon, the woman he attacked back in 1992? Well, imagine her now. She was at home, and one night she overheard on the CBS show 48 Hours a segment dealing with Tommy Lynn Sells regarding his 13-year-old Texas girl that he murdered and his confessions to the murders all over the country. Well, what she said of this was, quote, "I just had a breakdown. I just started crying. I wondered, why did I live when all of these other people died?" End quote. This forced her to remember the nightmare she endured with Tommy almost 10 years prior. Now at his jury trial, Tommy pled guilty to the attempted murder charge, remember, of Katie, and presented no evidence regarding his guilt in her murder. Kind of contradicts. The state also presented evidence that when Tommy was in jail awaiting his trial for capital murder, he became angry at a fellow inmate, threatening to kill him, and the jail officials had to relocate the inmate to a different part of the facility, away from Tommy. Now, Tommy was interviewed by psychologist Dr. Frederick Gary Mears. When he interviewed Tommy, he determined the 4 following traits. Tommy was, quote, "off the scale," end quote, in terms of the likelihood of future violence. 2, the nature of many of Katie's non-fatal wounds suggested Tommy derived pleasure from the brutality of the murder. 3, Tommy qualified as a highly manipulative and antisocial personality. 4, Tommy displayed no remorse for the murder of Katie and attempted murder of Crystal. On September 18, 2000, a jury convicted Tommy of the capital murder of 13-year-old Kayleen Katie Harris. Following a separate punishment phase proceeding on September 20th, 2000, the court sentenced Tommy to death. Tommy Lynn Sells was scheduled for execution on Thursday, April 3rd, 2014. Yes, 14 years later. Tommy, during these years, filed numerous appeals. They were all denied. On death row, Tommy stated he had found God. His mother and his girlfriend, yes, Tommy had a girlfriend, visited him regularly, and he wrote poetry about his life. When asked where he was headed when he died, Tommy said, quote, "Where am I going? I'm going to heaven. Society gave me their judgment. I've got no choice but to accept it. Now it's between me and my maker," end quote. Tommy refused to say he was sorry. He said if he did apologize and show remorse, people would throw stones. Tommy declined to give a final statement or make eye contact with any of the witnesses that came to his execution, and that included the victims' families, as he was strapped to a gurney and was to be executed. Terry Harris, who was the father of Katie Harris, who died when Tommy killed her, said of his death, quote, "It was way more gentle than he gave out," end quote. Tommy Lynn Sells was pronounced dead at 6:27 p.m. on April 3rd, 2014, executed. Investigators stated the range of Tommy's crimes defies simple analysis, and his victims spanned generational, gender, and geographic lines. In addition, he used a variety of weapons, gun, knives, or his hands. So it was a lot harder to track him at the time. Although 15 cases had enough evidence against him, it is estimated that Tommy Lynn Sells had killed up to 70 people. And that is the case of Tommy Lynn Sells. Thank you for sticking around for another episode of Danny After Dark. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Do you have a question about the case or a comment? Leave it down below. Let's be interactive. Have you heard of Tommy Lynn Sells before? I didn't for quite a long time. And when I did, I was stunned. How had I never heard his name before? So leave a question or a comment down below. Do you have a case suggestion that you would like me to cover? Leave it down below and you may see it covered in a future episode. Until next time, remember, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us.